Hey everybody, it's Mike from The Beaten Trail. We are here with Kyle from OffRoad Consulting, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about the business that you do for both full-size and off-road side-by-side riders.
Well, first, thanks for having me. Basically what we do is anything and everything off-road, from training classes to winch classes to guided rides, anything of the sort. We do a lot of product development and work, but our specialties are basically our off-road driving classes, our winch classes, and we do that with both full-size and UTV, and we also do a lot of corporate trainings all across the country.
Okay. Well, I'm looking at all the equipment that is behind us, and it's quite impressive. This is not a store. This is your collection, and we're actually in the training center that you do some of your training, so it's impressive. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you have back here.
Well, this is basically a 30-year collection of gear that I've been putting together. When things come out, I like to acquire them so people can have a hands-on approach before they buy gear. There's a lot of bad gear out there and a lot of really good marketing that makes you think the bad gear is good gear. So I like to have gear here that everybody can touch, play, and feel before they go buy it, so they're not wasting their money on equipment that is not suited for what they're trying to do.
Excellent. Good. Well, we do a lot of riding. We don't do a lot of recovery. I would say we do basic recovery, which is one winch, one side-by-side, and a recovery. Nothing as complex as what you do. And the weights and the capacities are obviously much smaller on a side-by-side than what you're doing, so the equipment is going to be of significant larger size. Is that a true statement?
Well, yes and no. For the most part, yes, the calculations have to come into play, but there are some situations that trump that. About 6 or 7 years ago, I was out at FRO and I had to winch a side-by-side out of a mud pit, and the mud wasn't even as far up to his floorboards, and it took 18,000 pounds of pulling force to pull out a 2,000-pound side-by-side that only had 30-inch tires on it. So when you're looking at weights and capacities with it, the side-by-sides can get stuck just as bad as a full-size. It all depends on the soil conditions, the resistance, the size of the machine, is it running or not, and you have all these stipulations, plus side-by-sides don't really have many connection points that can hold 18,000 pounds or so, so you have to be creative also with your recovery points and your connections so you're not ripping the bumpers off and providing a dangerous situation where somebody could get hurt.
Sure. So the physics class that nobody likes, really important when it comes to recovery and off-roading. We don't realize it. I know that, like you said, the side-by-sides, even though it's lighter, that there's a lot more physics involved. I guess we haven't been in extreme mud where the resistance of removing a vehicle is that difficult.
Or even in a situation where one barrel rolls down off the side of a hill and is tangled up into brush and trees, and you got to flip it over, winch it, get it back on its wheels to winch it up the hill. The side-by-sides can have some pretty complex setups for recovering them, that's for sure.
Okay. And you offer classes also for side-by-side groups, UTVs, to learn the basics. I guess you have different levels of training. You can take people out and they can do real-life simulation training and then also some classroom training?
Absolutely. We have quite a few different styles like that. We've actually had customers, like one customer last summer came out for 13 days in a row, and it was just nonstop driving and recovery. And we have days, it's like what we call what if day, where you go out there and it's like, okay, here's the obstacle, how would you go through it? When you get stuck, then we go and we get you out. But it's using what gear you would have and have you think differently of how you would use what equipment you have to get yourself out. Because that's one of the biggest things I've noticed over the years is a lot of people have the gear that can work, but because they don't know how to use it, something happens and they get hurt or they damage the equipment. When if they just thought of it a different way or use something to help reduce the resistance, anything of the sort, if you're more creative in the recovery, you can make it a more efficient and safer recovery.
Okay. Is there some basic, like level 1 equipment that you recommend individuals have if they have a winch, whether they have steel or synthetic? Is it, what would you add to a level 1 side-by-side recovery if you're just doing basic planning for a recovery?
Well, and it doesn't matter if it's side-by-side or full-size. If you have a winch, you need a way to attach that winch to a tree or to another vehicle. So having a tree saver and a shackle are the most basic pieces of equipment. You can work around everything else, but if you have those two, those are the most basic. But now, if you're trying to do a lot of self-recoveries, you need a pulley then also, or a block to help get yourself out with a little bit more pulling capacity through a mechanical advantage. And then there's different safety things you can add to it to help keep yourself safe, but reality, the education is the safest thing you can do. And I have, on the floor down here, I have a bunch of winch lines that I've pulled off of trees out here from people taking their cable and wrapping it around the tree and hooking back to itself. And you can see that in every mud pit out here where the trees are scarred from that. And that is just either people not having the right equipment or just a lack of education going, it's a winch, it's going to pull me out of anything. Well, then they're damaging the equipment, and I go out there and find winch lines around trees all the time that they broke off, and the people just leave them there. Having gear helps you preserve the winch line and the trees and the environment here, but also then you can keep reusing your gear if you have proper gear, and you're not wasting money on new cable, new rope, and things like that. Plus, the danger that's in those situations is huge. So having the proper gear for it, and something as simple as a properly rated tree saver and a shackle to hook your winch line to, that is the most basic, and it's cheap, especially for a side-by-side. But that is the equipment you need to get yourself out of almost any simple situation like that.
The Beaten Trail is sponsored by Ride Royal Blue ATV Resort in Pioneer, Tennessee, where all of your Tennessee adventures begin. Lodging for any budget, bring your RV, or stay in a cabin. Trails are attached to the resort and not a far drive on ATV legal pavement, so stop down at Ride Royal Blue in Tennessee. And the Potter County ATV UTV Club. And Pine Grove Yamaha, sales and service for Yamaha and so much more. Thank you AOAA for sponsoring the Beaten Trail.
For a side-by-side, you could use something as simple as a smaller tree saver, if you want to hold that. Yep. And a lot of different kits come with different size shackles. So some of these smaller ones, like this, has a working load limit of 2 ton. So that's one of the smaller ones, and then they have the 5/8, which I actually like using more than the quarter or the half, is because this has a little bit higher of a rating, and you can fit more gear into this. So if you're trying to hook up this, it's really difficult to try to smash it all in there, and you're going to end up damaging everything. By having a little bit bigger of a shackle, you can fit more in there, and your winch hook will still attach to this.
Okay.
So just basically a tree saver and a shackle, and you want a tree saver that is rated to handle what the winch can pull. So most side-by-sides have up to a 5,500-pound winch. So you want to have that tree saver that'll hold 3 times what the winch's capacity is. Then you don't have to worry about the tree saver failing that way. If you're going to start using a block, you want to look at different things that way. But having a nice tree saver that you can put around a tree, size-wise, you don't need anything that's 20 foot long. We're not in the land of 3-foot oak trees anymore. We're using stuff primarily 6 to 12 inches around. So having a nice, like this is an 8-foot. This actually has a working load limit on it of 12,400 pounds. And the braking strength of this would be 62,000 pounds. So something as small as this that you could pick up for 50, 60 bucks, has the proper ratings, have yourself a nice shackle that your hook can attach to. Simple, 60, 70 bucks, and you have everything you need that will last you for years if you take care of it.
Okay, good, good. And then so the next, if we went to level 2, it would be like something along the line of a pulley to help with leverage and increasing your pulling performance and safety?
Correct. So, I like using these worn blocks because they're small, they're lightweight, they're easy to use. That actually has a working load limit of it on 5 tons, so that's 10,000 pounds as a working load limit. So with this, the braking strength is going to be 20,000 pounds, so more than enough for any of the ATVs and side-by-sides. Small, lightweight, easy to use.
Okay. Bit of a side note, what are your thoughts on steel cable versus synthetic when it comes to a less than 2,000 pound UTV side-by-side?
It's a personal preference, and there's a lot of different narratives that different people push for whether steel cable's better or synthetic's better. And just because it fits their lifestyle doesn't mean it fits yours. So you have to do what's best for you and your lifestyle. If you're going to be working in environments where you're dragging it across rocks and in a very abrasive area, yes, steel cable can be the better option for you. I personally like synthetic, but not for the normal reasons that everybody pushes as a narrative, like it doesn't recoil when it breaks, which is not 100% true. And all the other things with it that they push down your throat as a marketing tool for liabilities. I like the fact that you don't have to put as much time and effort into synthetic rope. So steel cable, you always have to have tension on it. If you even let a little bit of slack back, it starts to bird nest inside the winch. Then you have to fight with that. You have to re-spool it almost every time you winch. Otherwise, it'll be damaged because you'll get a tight layer, a loose layer, then a tight layer, which will smash it flat. And if you don't fix that, it'll create a memory. Then you always have a kink, which is a 20% loss in strength. Where synthetic, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And one thing with my side-by-side, with what I do between the trainings, the guided rides, but also I do a lot of off-road parking mapping, where I'm out by myself in the middle of nowhere. When I'm working with the stuff, I don't have time to re-spool it in and out. And like the last West Virginia trip I was on, I winched 9 times in 45 minutes. With steel cable, I would have had to take a break. It would have been too physically exhausting with constantly dragging the cable, making sure it's put back in nice, and redoing it every time. Where the synthetic, it was just easier for me to keep going and keep moving with it. So the just physical time and work that goes into steel cable is why I'm not a huge fan of steel cable. The safety end of it, I can take care of all that. I know the precautions with all that. It's just more work and more physical work for steel cable.
So why do you think that it's standard gear is steel cable? Do you think it's just cheaper, or is it just that's been the industry standard for a while on UTVs? I mean, I don't know. Maybe some come with synthetic, but I don't think I've ever seen an ATV. My Grizzly had steel cable. My R-Max has steel cable, and those are worn or OEM Yamaha. So I was just curious. Any ideas? Was that just the synthetic was a newer development, and maybe the steel has been always around?
Well, I think a lot of that is manufacturer's preference. And not to talk bad about any manufacturer, I think a lot of it is manufacturer's preference because it's what they can get to fit within those parameters for the financials of when they're trying to build the machine and get it out the door as cheap as they can to the consumer. That is the cheaper way of doing it.
Okay.
Synthetic is going to be a little bit more expensive. And honestly, with most of the stuff I do, I buy the winches with steel cable and convert them over to synthetic because it's actually cheaper in the long run than buying it with synthetic.
Yeah.
So you could do that from the manufacturer, buy it with steel cable, switch it over to synthetic. It's actually not that expensive, and then you have the setup you need. Excellent.
Good. Well, it's just questions that I always had. I've always had a winch on my ride, and it always came with steel. So just an interesting piece for people that are watching that. And I've converted one of mine when I had the Honda. I converted it to a synthetic, but I know that anything else that people should know about synthetic that maybe they should know versus you mentioned a few, but any downfalls that someone says, oh, I'm going to switch it to synthetic that they should watch out for?
Well, synthetic itself, the abrasion's the biggest thing with it. You have to be careful with that, and there's differences between the roller and the Hawes Fairleads and stuff like that that create their own issues between the two types of rope or cable. But with the synthetic, it's actually stronger than steel by the same size, but you have to worry about the abrasion end of it. As long as you take care of it, it will last you. But if you're going to try to use the synthetic like you would with steel and dragging it across the ground and winching over top of rocks or going across a sharp edge on your bumper, then it's not going to last as long that way. But you have the same ill effects with like dirt grinding inside of them. Both types that way are going to have that same thing. So basically the biggest thing is going to be the abrasion end of it. But it's just, I think it makes up for it if you take care of it, because it's going to be less physical work.
Yeah, and to maintain the proper winding when you wind it back in, keep it clean.
Correct.
When you wash your machine, if you use your winch a lot, you should get all that mud and caked stuff out as well.
Correct, and there's processes with that that's best left for another time. But yes, there are processes with that to keep your gear in good working condition.
Okay. Is there anything, I mean, I know there's not a winch episode, but is there anything else that people should know about maintaining their winch other than what we just mentioned? Is there regular greasing, or is it anything that you can think of, just really high level, what people should know about their winch other than keeping it clean?
Well, most of them, they're sealed units. So with a winch like this, you don't want to take this apart and get in there unless you absolutely have to. If you have a winch on your vehicle or your machine that's been on there, say, 5-10 years and you've never used it, well, the grease inside can get hard, and then you might have to take it apart to repack it with grease, which I've had to do already. The motors can get some corrosion in there if you don't use them often. So one of the biggest things is just make sure you use your winch a couple times a year, even if you're only pulling out 10 feet, winching it back in, just to keep everything cycling and functioning.
Okay.
But for the most part, they're sealed up units, and nowadays with the IP ratings and stuff, they really make sure they're nice and sealed up for waterproofing and things like that.
Okay.
So that part of it isn't really a big deal with it. But one of the biggest things with winching is just taking care of your equipment. But riders often look at it as this is their get out of jail free card. No matter how stuck they get, how bad of a situation they're in, they just hook up and use it. And they expect miracles to happen. Well, there's only so much the winch can do. The gear is going to do a lot of it. But the lack of respect that especially the side-by-side industry has for winches, like towing using your winch on the front is terrible. Like towing a vehicle out of the woods using the winch hook, which we see all the time. Every time you create slack and jerk, that is just pulling against the brake. So that's going to rip the brake out of it. You actually using the winch to strap your vehicle down to a trailer is the same thing. Every bump, you're getting slack tension, and it damages the brakes. But the side-by-side industry is very abusive on their winches, just using them for ways they should not use them. And I know quite a few people that make a really good living just repairing winches. Yeah. And a lot of it is from the ATV side-by-side industry.
Yeah. Well, like you mentioned, we don't think about it, and I guess people see it as a universal tool, and but obviously you're not going to use it to strap down, but I've seen people do that as well. I guess if you have a side-by-side that is disabled, you can winch it onto the trailer, but strap it down appropriately. Right. With the winch off, so like you said, so you don't damage it. But I've seen them used, and I'm sure everybody watching also has used a winch in ways it wasn't intended. And I guess the main thing is, like you said, it's emergency, get it out of there. I know one of the as far as safety things go, don't stand around or behind or around the direct. I don't know, what would we call a braking area, or what do they call it when it's
Well, there's a lot of terms, but basically the path of anything flying back at you. You don't want to be anywhere near where something could fly and hit you. And there's actually new techniques and new things that are coming out with that a lot of the old ways that everybody's kind of fixated on, that you have to do this and you have to do that. That's the old way of thinking. There's a lot of new techniques out there that are much safer and simpler, but they're just taking a lot longer to catch on because people are so fixated on the old ways.
Okay. Well, we probably could use an off-road test winch how-to at some point, and we'll have to work on that going forward. But it's great information to have. I mean, everybody has a winch. Not everybody uses it, and obviously some of us probably use it incorrectly quite often. I appreciate you telling us some of the basics here, and you have a whole classroom here, so there's hours and hours that we can speaking about, but we'd love to come back another time and do some advanced discussions on recovery, at least for the side-by-sides. But yes, do you want to tell us anything quick about the full-size business that you do? I know that they can go to the website, and the website, Off-Road Consulting, we'll put that up. We'll make sure that maybe we can get a little more information out to people if we're interested. But tell us just really about the full-size side of the business that you do.
Well, like I said, the guided rides, the driving training classes, and we have a plethora of those, a 101 or 201 or 301s, skill improvements, but we also have overland classes, our trail repair class, our recovery classes, our winching 101s, our winching 201s. We pretty much have classes for almost everything, including driving off-road with a trailer. So we have all different types of stuff that way, but we differ a little bit when it comes to that because we are more of a experience-based company. Our drivers are good drivers that have been doing off-road driving for years. I've been driving off-road for 30 years, over 30 years now, and I put a lot of my experiences into this because when I first started out, I didn't have a lot of money to put into repair, so I had to drive differently, and I had to keep my ego in check because if somebody was trying this hill climb and abusing their vehicle and breaking it, I couldn't do it because I needed my vehicle to get me to work the next day or to do something of the sort. So I always had to be a little bit more methodical with how I chose my lines, how I handled every obstacle, and that's what we carry over to the off-road training classes because we want you to come out, we want you to have fun, we want you to learn how to push your limits, but our goal is to not damage the vehicle. And that doesn't mean we're sticking to the easiest trails possible. That means we're just showing you how to better think your way through the stuff because most off-roaders look at it as, oh, you're not having fun till you're denting, scratching it, breaking the window. That's your badge of honor. Well, no, it actually takes more skill to get through the same obstacle without harming the vehicle than it does to abuse it. And that's just our approach with it. We want you to just be a smarter off-roader because we don't want you or the vehicle being harmed while you're out here.
Okay, excellent. Good. Well, I appreciate your time. I'm hoping that we'll see more of demonstrations in the field, and we'll have an episode where we can get out and go over some real world experiences and situations. But I appreciate your time, Kyle. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
And if anybody has any questions about the stuff, they can reach out to you, and I can help in any way.
Yep, we'll put his email out and website down below, and you can reach out to Kyle for any other questions you may have, or for classroom or consulting services.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you to our sponsor, Ride Royal Blue, as well as the Potter County ATV UTV Club and Lit Industries for the brightest rock lights and accessories you can find. Visit Pine Grove Yamaha for sales and service of Yamaha and all other rides. Thank you, Anthracite Outdoor Adventure Area, for supporting the Beaten Trail. Appreciate all our partners. Thank you very much for being along for the ride. Visit our stores for hats and shirts and so much more. We appreciate you watching, and we hope to see you out there on the trail. Thanks.